I dealt with insomnia for probably more than 15 years before finding your program and finally seeing that it was possible to be free of it. I decided that I was going to get off the sleep medication that I had been taking for. I honestly feel like the pill is probably more of a placebo for me than it is actually putting me to sleep at night. And that's something that for years, I just assumed that the chemical effects of this pill were the only reason that my body could sleep at night. And I'm now learning that's not true. When I think about it, the sailing journey was really about all the same things as insomnia recovery. It was about sort of letting go of, all my fears of discomfort and my need to control and just letting myself sort of go with the flow of where things were taking us, because I could not be in control of that journey. And I also cannot be in control of my sleep, which is what I was trying to do for so many years.
It has to come from a place of safety and of support and of kindness. And that is the biggest thing that I would like to kind of emphasize today is that self-kindness piece. That for me came really late in the journey. I just could not quite grasp how I was being unkind to myself. But it was in this way that I had this expectation and this standard that I was holding myself to. And that was just me being really critical on myself. Hi, community. Welcome to another episode on the Sacred Sleep Coach channel. I'm Coach Allie, and I have today with me my friend and former client, Kristin, who graduated from the immunity program of the Sleep Coach School. What was that, 8 months ago, something like that?
Yeah, it was around the beginning of this year in 2025.
Okay.
Maybe January.
All right. That's
February.
Okay. That's right. And you had quite the recovery story, which there is a success story available for you to check out on the Sleep Coach channel, where I interviewed Kristin with her about her recovery story. But I wanted to check back in with you, Kristin, and just kind of get a feel of how recovery has progressed for you, what life has looked like beyond recovery. And I know you took this amazing journey on a sailboat. And you lived on this sailboat right on the heels of your recovery, right on the heels of leaving insomnia, which I think is absolutely amazing, so brave and so wonderful. And I've kind of followed you along on your writings about that on your Substack blog, which I definitely want you to share with our community. But I just want you to be able to have a moment to share this experience and what you've learned and how you brought these teachings with you on that trip and kind of how it helped and just where you're at with everything right now. Do you mind sharing with us?
Sure. It's hard to know where to start, but I'll just say quickly as background that I dealt with insomnia for probably more than 15 years before finding your program and finally seeing that it was possible to be free of it. So I had just thought it was something I was going to have to deal with forever. So even knowing that, my husband and I had this sort of big dream that we wanted to move on to our sailboat and sail from North Carolina to Maine, and hopefully spend a lot of a year, the better part of a year sailing together. And it just so happened that not that long before we were planning to leave on this trip, I got into, one of the worst periods of insomnia that I had ever dealt with. And that's how I ended up becoming your client and your student.
And you kind of had to press pause on this trip, right?
Well, we sort of delayed it a little, and that was partly just because it was difficult for us to get ready, but I think also I was nervous about the whole thing and
right.
A lot going on in life. And then I had that period back, around a year ago, around the holidays in 2024, when I basically went 2 months without a restful night of sleep and was kind of at the end of my rope. It was a really tough time. And that at that point, I was also, I think that part of what brought that on, aside from also life stress, was that I had decided that I was going to get off the sleep medication that I had been taking for
Right.
more than, I mean, I'd really been taking some kind of medication ever since I developed insomnia more than 15 years ago, but I had been on Seroquel continuously for 12 years. And I
Yeah.
decided that I was going to go off it in 2 weeks.
Yes,
So that might have been part of what brought me to a really difficult period.
Yeah, that was a big jump.
Right.
Yeah.
So with your help, I ended up, I went through recovery. I did really hard work to, as we talked about more in the last story, to sort of get over that hump and bring my brain and body back into some kind of feeling of safety. But I also started taking the Seroquel again because it just felt like anything I could do to make it a little bit easier for me was something that I should do. It was, yeah.
Support yourself. And I remember having lots of conversations about that when you first entered the program and entered the immunity program. And like kind of just working with some of those beliefs and feelings and fears around the medication itself, because that's really kind of where our program is helpful, right? Is working with those fears that perpetuate the struggle. So yes, sorry, back to you.
Yeah, I was so set on the idea that I was going to be off this medication because I had discovered the sleep coach school and done the app, and I thought that I had started to figure this out. So I felt that getting off this medication would mean that I was fully recovered. It was this really important milestone for me, and I was going to get there as fast as humanly possible was sort of my attitude. And now I see, with the benefit of hindsight, that was a little bit misguided. So anyway, I to get back to your initial question, I mean, I felt like I was able to conquer so many of the fears and just the habitual way that I approached my insomnia as like, this is a disaster. This is the end of the world. This is ruining my life. And I still stayed, when I graduated from the immunity program, I was continuing and I still take Seroquel to this day, but we'll talk more later about how that's starting to change.
We'll get into some of that. Yeah, for sure.
But I did not see that. I no longer saw that as a marker of whether I was recovered.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it was just conquering that big fear that held me back from a lot of things and just sort of haunted me every day of my life.
Yeah.
So yeah, after I got out of the program, I just immediately moved into a lot of other big life things. I quit my job, I think within a month that I had been in for almost 15 years. Very shortly after, I madly cleaned out my house so that we could rent it out because we've been living here a long time and a lot of junk had accumulated. And then we moved on to our boat in the beginning of the summer, which is a 37-foot tartan sailboat.
Wow.
And that was really a massive change in our lives. At the early June, we took off for this trip, heading from North Carolina to Maine, and it did not, since you've been reading my Substack, you know that it didn't go exactly as I had planned it in my mind.
Just like everything in life, right? Nothing goes as we plan.
Yeah. First, our boat does not have all of the luxuries that some other boaters have. We're not wealthy sailors. So we hit a massive heat wave in the Chesapeake Bay, and I mean, it was over 100 degrees, and our boat was just like a heater. It was like a furnace in there for a few weeks. That was really a difficult time. That was one of the biggest obstacles was the heat.
Oh gosh, the middle of the summer in that heat wave. Yeah. But
And
what's so amazing and impressive to me is that like you did this having just come out of this recovery journey, right? Just on the heels of it. And here you are, sweltering heat on a sailboat, right? Like you said, it's that the accommodations are not, super fancy. and you're doing this. Like I mean, I know people that have gone through this insomnia experience are going to be quite impressed by this, because this amount of courage and trust that in yourself and in your capacity to be able to do this and go on this journey, this trip on the sailboat. I mean, it's quite, I found it really inspiring, I have to say.
yeah, and it was really interesting to me to see, we have a lot of ideas about, especially when we have trouble sleeping, that if this set of conditions is not met, there is absolutely no way I'll be able to sleep.
Right.
And I think one that many of us, I know a lot of women that I know, feel that we absolutely cannot sleep if it's too hot.
Yeah. Yeah.
That we
Especially
have
if
to
we
be.
might be of the menopausal ages.
Right, exactly. And that's another thing. You must be on hormone therapy to sleep if you're approaching 50, seems to be the feeling among most people I know. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, that was something that I believed. Like, I didn't think I could sleep in a lot of heat, and I don't know why. I worried about almost everything else before this trip, but I didn't think to worry about the heat. So it just kind of took me by surprise.
Right.
I figured that out on the water, it would be cooler. It wasn't. It was not.
Oh, interesting.
And there were biting
yeah, you
flies.
would. Oh, biting flies. Oh, not a good combo.
Not usually in bed when we were trying to sleep.
Well, that's good. Oh my gosh.
But I learned I didn't have all that fear around sleep anymore about what would happen if I didn't sleep. I knew that I would be okay. So I just found that, with the exception of probably the hottest night of the heat wave, when it was so hot in the boat that it made me panic, I felt as if we were going to roast alive.
Yeah.
But aside from that night, I found that I could lie there very still and very calm, and eventually it would cool down enough that it would be okay and my body would fall asleep. Yeah. And you just learn that, maybe you don't need as many things as you think you do in order to be able to do this sort of basic human function of sleep.
Right. Yeah. The conditions don't absolutely have to be perfect, right? We realize that our sleep is more adaptable, and putting yourself in that situation where, I mean, you really did kind of throw yourself into that, and that adaptability, it came with you, thank goodness. But I'm just so amazed at this, and how you met this challenge, met this experience with this new found trust in yourself, and the understanding that you didn't have to have the fear running this program anymore. Like, that fear had been met. Sounds like you really made peace with that fear, and that was obviously a big part of the recovery journey, but it kind of led you to this brand new life experience where you could go on this amazing sailing trip. Now, I know everything didn't go perfect, and you can kind of talk to us a little bit more about that. But just the fact that you shared now that you were able to lay there without fear. And even though the conditions, it was hot, there were flies, there were so many things in the environment, and you were still able to meet that, know you were safe, and you fell asleep, right? Eventually you fell asleep. And I just think that's such a beautiful.
I would say I slept, with the exception of a couple nights, I slept pretty much fine every night for the 2 months that we were on the boat, which is amazing.
It is 2 months.
I'll tell you about one night, the one night when I did not sleep well, because it also shows me how much my fear has lessened.
Right.
It was the night before, one of probably the scariest thing that we had to do on this trip was big ocean passage, where we went from Virginia to Rhode Island nonstop through the Atlantic Ocean. And it was about 3 days of continuous sailing,
Wow.
so in the dark across shipping channels that go through New York City. And um, just, it was a long trip.
Wow.
I had never, ever done an ocean passage or an overnight passage before. Um, so it was kind of scary. And it was also scary because you have to, yeah, someone has to be awake at all times. So we had to
Yeah, I
go
was
into
going to say you're sleeping in shifts, right? And
yeah.
so the pressure to sleep is probably greater than too, right?
Right. I mean, the idea that I, of all people, could, lay down and sleep during my 4-hour shift of sleep seemed almost ridiculous. But the night before we were leaving, I was just nervous about the trip, and I couldn't fall asleep. And even then, I was able to, and I mean, it was not ideal to go into a 3-day trip where we were not going to be able to sleep normally, feeling really tired from a night
Right.
of no sleep. And that's what ended up happening because I wasn't able to get to sleep and didn't get a lot of sleep that night. But I didn't freak out about it. I just kept with the sort of thoughts that I had cultivated, which were, I have gone through so many nights of not getting good sleep, of not getting enough sleep, and nothing has ever happened. I have always been able to do what I needed to do the next day. I've always been fine, and I'll be fine again this time.
Mm.
And I wasn't, so even though I wasn't able to fall asleep, I wasn't lying there like, oh my God, the whole ocean passage is going to be wrecked. We're going to
Yeah.
sink the boat because I haven't slept. Or so it made
Yeah.
it so much better. And, I was tired. It probably did make me more tired on the trip, but we made it. And I was able to sleep during my shifts. And even with the
That's
motor running, which is so loud. And I I sort of put faith in the universe that I could do this, and it worked out.
it's so amazing. And I love that story that you just shared because I had a similar experience. And this was, I mean, I don't know, maybe 6, 7 months ago. I don't even know how long, maybe longer, but I had gone on a trip and I came back and I had some, just sleep disruption. And I had a night that I just couldn't fall asleep. And I finally did at like 4 a.m. Slept for just like a couple hours. But when I did wake up and I'd only slept for 2 or 3 hours, there was no panic. There was the emotional reaction of, my day's going to be ruined, or this is going to affect everything, or the anxiety that used to ensue. None of that was there. And it was like what you kind of just shared with me. It just reminds me of this experience that I had where I was like, wow, I've come really far. Like it was really insightful to see that how far I'd come because when that reaction was just not there. There wasn't fear, there wasn't anxiety, there wasn't, dread or panic. It was just like, I'm fine. I'm really fine. Was I tired that day? Sure, a little bit, but it wasn't it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't even a big deal. And
It's
that just
amazing how much easier the day after a rough night feels when you are not in a complete anxiety spiral about
yes.
your sleep.
Yeah.
I
When
mean,
that
when it's just like, oh, I
emotional
guess that's something that
heaviness.
happens every once in a while, and
Yeah.
it's no
Yeah.
big deal.
Yes, which really is what recovery is, right? It's that emotional reaction and that emotional attachment. It's just so much different. I mean, I'm no longer reactive. Yes, I still prefer to sleep. Well, all humans do, but if that doesn't happen, I'm not devastated anymore. I'm not even really. I'm not paused. It's just like okay.
Right.
And that is so different, right? Like that marked such a I was kind of even happy that I had that experience because I was like, wow, that was just showed me so clearly how far I've really come. And I hear that in that story that you just shared. It's like, wow, I'm going to be fine. And I was fine. I was tired, but everything that I needed to do, I was able to do.
And in my experience, that lack of a reaction, that lack of this intense fear about how the next day is going to feel, um, changes the night in that it doesn't get as bad as it used to. Like I can't see myself having a full all-nighter without that intense anxiety that I used to spin up.
Yeah.
I am able to eventually fall asleep and get a decent amount of sleep to at least feel, better
Yeah.
during the day.
Yeah.
When the anxiety doesn't play so much of a role.
Yeah, there's not the same spiral, and the way I think of that, just like in the way we understand the brain, is that conditioned response is no longer conditioned. You know, we've unconditioned or reconditioned. We have a new experience now that is really what we're experiencing most of the time, right? It's interesting because I could feel just a tiny bit of my brain wanting to pull me into that old story that it used to kind of tell me about, oh, you're going to feel terrible today. Oh, it's going to be a hard day, or what, all the narratives that used to play in my head on a loop. And I could just feel the tiny bit of remnant there. And what was so interesting is it was just like, I just saw it for what it was. I was like, this is not true. I feel fine. Like it's not actually true. So it was and then it just dissolved, it was just like, oh, wow. There was no traction. There was like no staying power because it wasn't looping anymore. Right.
That is what and there was a coach in training whose name I forget now, but she talked about that process of, yeah, it's not as like that fear is still sort of there. It's like this ghost presence that it'll come back up. But then I remember to go back to the way I think about it is like sort of there's my mind shattering and saying all its fears that it wants me to buy into. And I used to completely buy into them. And now I can sort of drop down into this more witness consciousness place and say, oh, there goes my mind, telling its little stories again.
Yep.
And just let that be. Don't try to fight it. Don't try to argue with it. Just sort of drop into another part of myself and let that go on. And it's amazing how it changes my reaction.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a big part of the recovery journey, and that process is learning to practice being that observer, because I don't think it is it doesn't come so naturally. Right. And so it is a practice of learning to observe what's happening in our internal experience without being so reactive. That really took me time to understand, like, I'm not my thoughts, and I'm not these sensations, and I'm, not these emotions. I'm the witness, I'm the experiencer. But there is some space, it's a very small little space between this experience and the one experiencing it. And that took me quite some time to feel that, embody that. But has made such a big difference, like in so many areas of my life, well beyond, sleep and insomnia. But yeah, so let's like talk a little bit too about, and we can come back to this story too, because I love this story. I'm just, like I said, so inspired by it. I want to encourage everybody to follow you on your Substack. So please give a shout out to where they can find you there. And let's also talk about this idea of using or allowing ourselves, giving ourselves permission to still take a med while we are recovering, right? To allow that to be part of our journey and our process, and that it isn't indicative of whether or not we can recover or whether or not we are recovered, right? If we choose to implement the use of a med, it's neutral. It does not matter. It doesn't affect, whether we're recovered or not recovered, or it's a neutral thing. And I want to really normalize that, because I work with so many people that they have so much fear around the med. And I know what that feels like, because I did too. And that was a big part of my journey, is working with that fear. And I still take a med to this day. Sometimes I have no issue with it anymore. I don't have any fears or self, judgment or inner conflict about it. So there's a lot of freedom there. And the freedom from that fear, to me, is what recovery is, right? Because I have so much freedom around that now. And I wanted to just have you share your experience with that, because I know you've experienced some of this as well with the medication.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, my initial experience with insomnia was very intense on a vacation, several nights of hardly any sleep at all. So I ended up going to the emergency room where they gave me Ativan, and I basically always wanted to get off medications after that, but just never felt that I could. And it just became something that I felt like I was locked into and didn't see a way that I could ever get off of them. And so I guess it was something, it felt like I wasn't happy with that it was just, and even as time went by, it wasn't as if I even felt that the medication I was taking was working very well. I mean, I had really bad insomnia even with it. But the thought of going off it was like, it would just destroy me, was sort of how I felt. But then I discovered the sleep coach school, and I met with you, and then I finally saw a path, to getting off of this medication. And now I see that I became fixated on that as some marker of recovery. And what I think about now is the whole approach that first spoke to me was Daniel's acronym NATO, not attached to the outcome. And that's really what I have to go back to when I'm having a night where I'm, not falling asleep like I want to. I cannot, I'm not attached to the outcome. If I don't sleep, I'm fine. But I was so attached to the outcome that first time when I tried to get off those pills. Like, I will be victorious over over this, and I will, proclaim. I even actually pre-wrote a bunch of stuff that I was going to post on the internet, like celebrating how I had gotten off my meds. And so
interesting. Yeah.
Now.
There was a lot, sounds like there was a lot of, almost like a value, like this, it had a lot of weight, there was some shame or something involved here where you gave it a lot of meaning, right? Including like writing a story about it as if, you had gotten off of it. So there was definitely something there that was really,
and like how terrible
really
that I had taken this for so long, and now I'm free, and I am, I trust my body to do what it needs to do. And it was just this whole storyline that I'd created. And then when I ended up in that, terrible insomnia spiral after going off it so quickly, after a while, I found myself at a doctor's office because I am 50 years old, and every single friend that I talk to about my sleeping problems, which, the advice of not talking to friends about your insomnia, who is a good one, but but everyone said, "Oh, you've got to get on hormones, then you'll sleep like a baby and it'll be no problem." So I went to a doctor and I told her, I'm feeling so anxious. I'm not sleeping, I wasn't having any of the other like typical menopause symptoms. And she said, I'll give you hormones if that's what you want, but I don't think that you're going to have the success you're hoping for with them, or that they're going to magically solve these problems.
Right. That they're the magic bullet.
And then she said, and I see that you were on a medication that is actually designed to help with these things, and that you just went off of it. And I was like, I guess you're right about that. So I think not long after I saw her, I came back and started taking my Seroquel again. And that did help my recovery, even though I had lots of terrible nights of sleep with Seroquel in the past. I don't know if it was just sort of giving in on this thing that I thought was so important. But as soon as I started taking it, something shifted. I mean, it wasn't like my recovery was over then and all the fear was gone and I was sleeping perfectly. But I definitely started getting more sleep each night, enough to allow me to sort of calm down enough to maybe be able to recover better.
Mm-hmm.
So at the time, I sort of saw it as this big defeat, that I had, and now here I am back at square one. I'll never be off this. But you and the other coaches helped me to sort of let go of that storyline and just, really the whole key for me to recovery was to deal with what's here and now, not with, what my life's going to look like tomorrow or next week or next year. And that's what I had to do. I had to make my decision based on, right now, not my storyline about how I wanted my life to be 5 years from now or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I started taking them again, and it was, I don't have any regrets about that now, looking back.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it almost sounds like there was a little bit of a piece of surrender in allowing the meds to be a bridge and to be helpful. And it was almost like a self-compassion, like a self-kindness, like, all right, I'm going to allow myself this support. Right. And even though I think from what you've said, it kind of came from a place where you felt a little defeated by that. There was like, oh gosh, I'm going to, but the experience you had was like, okay, it softened it. It softened the fight a little bit, right? So there wasn't so much intensity about it has to look a certain way. And if it doesn't look a certain way, then, to hell with it. Like you go giving up, like letting go of, like you said, the storyline, but also our expectation and the standard that we kind of have for ourselves. Like it has to be this way, or something's not right with me, or somehow I'm wrong or bad, or, my recovery is less than, which none of that, of course, is accurate. But I like how it kind of did shift things for you, where you were able to see it as a little bit more of a supportive self-kindness rather than the enemy.
Right. And so I'll say after that, I spent probably another month in the insomnia immunity program and finally reached this point where I just started sleeping well again, just started not having all this fear and being able to sleep at night. And my feeling was, I am not going to touch or change anything about this medication that I'm taking for a good while. Like I've been through a lot and I didn't want to go back there anytime soon. So I waited until just recently. I think it was the beginning of October, or maybe anyway, around there. And I decided that I was going to take an extremely gradual and soft approach to seeing whether I could reduce and eventually stop taking this pill every night. So I started by taking half a pill, and I decided I was going to do that for an entire month. And I was not going to talk to people about the fact that, like, I'm quitting my sleep medications or make any kind of big deal about it.
No big declarations.
I didn't even tell my husband that I was doing it at first. And I saw no difference in my sleep cutting it in half. And then at the end of a month, it must have been the beginning of September that I started this, because at the end of a month, when I was like, I was going to go down to a quarter pill, then I was kind of like, I'll just give it another week or two. I'm not feeling quite ready. But then eventually I went down to the quarter, and that's what I've been taking most nights now. And I mean, a quarter of the lowest dose of Seroquel is probably not a meaningful dose of anything.
Right.
But it hasn't changed my sleep.
Yeah.
So I honestly feel like the pill is probably more of a placebo for me than it's
Yeah,
than it is actually putting me to sleep at night. And that's
for
something that
sure.
for years I just assumed that the chemical effects of this pill were the only reason that my body could sleep at night. And I'm now learning that's not true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I'm still just going really slow. I'm not sure when I'll be ready to go to the no pill at all. And even once I do that, I'm going to be open to taking it again if I go through
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
tough stretch or a really
Mm-hmm.
stressful time, and
Yeah.
just not having any hard, like in the past, it was like once I got off it, I was going to be like an alcoholic or a drug addict who never touched it again. And I don't have that feeling about it at all anymore.
I think that's so healthy, and it's such a better kind of relationship with it than it being, this thing I have to avoid, or like, I had a really similar experience and conversations with coaches of mine, and I remember very well one of my coaches, Coach Michelle, and when we were talking about it, and I had gotten off, medication, and I wasn't using, anything every night, but I was still like, sometimes I just want to take a med, like, and I don't want to feel bad about it, and I don't want to feel like I, like somehow can't. And she was so reassuring and said, of course you can take it, you can do whatever you want to do to support and take care of yourself, right? And she said, and it's really actually so much healthier to be open to the possibility that that might be a helpful, supportive thing in the future, because you don't know what the future is going to bring. She's like, you might come across a speed bump, or, a hard life event that just, this would be helpful right now, and having an openness to it and not having that fear dictate your choices anymore. That's really where the freedom lies, is beyond that fear of, oh no, this is somehow wrong or bad. And that's where we get into the stickiness, right? And of course, just really quick for our community, we're not doctors. None of this is medical advice. We're not telling you to take a med or not to take a med. Everybody's different. Everybody has a different experience with it. It's a very touchy subject for a lot of people, because some people will swear meds saved their life, and other people will swear they damn near killed them. So there's going to be varying degrees of experience here, and all we're doing is sharing our experience. And what I've seen working with so many people is the fear is so much the program that's running this experience with the med, the underlying fears that we have about them, or just around the experience in general. So yeah, just on that note. And I love how you shared that with us, because I really can relate to everything you're saying. And I've took it really slow and gradual too. I don't take, anything every night at this point as far as medication, but if I have a night of sleep disruption, I have no problem taking a med. you know, I am a human. I still prefer to sleep well. All humans do. And so that's still my preference. And because there's no fight anymore, there's no hyperarousal, there's no anxiety. I'm not afraid of the med. I'm not afraid of being awake at night. The fear around wakefulness is no longer there. And so since there's none of these things, because we know hyperarousal can override the sedative effects of any med, that's what you were experiencing when you were having intense insomnia, even while taking a med, right? Our survival response is always going to be so much stronger than any med that we throw at it. But since that's no longer there, that program is no longer running. I no longer have a conditioned fear response around being awake at night. So there's nothing in the way anymore. And so the sedative effects work as they were intended to, so they're helpful. But there isn't any judgment either way for my specific experience. Like, I'm not in that space anymore of judging myself at all. And that to me feels like a lot of freedom, and that's kind of what I want to get across today, is like that where there's judgment, where there's shame, where there's fear, this is really more what perpetuates the struggle than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I was always taking things in the past with this feeling of like, oh my gosh, I hope this works. And if it doesn't work, I'm so screwed. And
Yes.
then it can start to snowball, where it's like, so taking my Seroquel every night was my baseline. But if I felt really nervous that night that like maybe it wasn't going to work because I felt keyed up, then I would add something else. Like maybe I would also take a THC gummy, and then, and then you can just keep doing more and more because
Oh,
you're
yeah.
motivated by
Yeah.
fear, and your fear can really
Exactly.
overcome anything. So
So
that's
true.
the key to me, is not taking it with this feeling of like, if this doesn't work, I am screwed, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And we talk about that so much in the program, right? It's like when whatever we're going to decide to do, right? If we're doing it with that intensity, with that, oh, this better work or I'm screwed, it's very often going to backfire. Most likely it is, because we're coming at it with that same survival energy that is running the fear program, right? It's the exact same energy that got us into this mess that we're using to try to get out of it. And that won't work. It has to come from a place of safety and of support and of kindness. And that is the biggest thing that I would like to kind of emphasize today, is that self-kindness piece. That for me came really late in the journey. I just could not quite grasp how I was being unkind to myself. But it was in this way that I had this expectation and this standard that I was holding myself to. And that was just me being really critical on myself. I wouldn't hold any other human to this standard, but for some reason for myself, there was a lot of shame, judgment, and self-criticism around medication, but also just around how I was feeling. Like I shouldn't be afraid, or I mean, fear is just an emotion that I'm going to feel from time to time because I'm a human being. It's like that. I don't need to stop that. I need to learn how to be with it in a new way. And that's really what the recovery experience teaches us.
Well, you
Go ahead.
suggested Michael Singer's books when I was in the immunity program, and one thing that he said that helped me so much was, just talking about anxiety and saying, don't ask your anxiety to calm down. That is not what anxiety does. Anxiety
Right.
is anxious. You calm down and let the anxiety be there. And
Yeah.
that distinction was so helpful to me.
Oh, I love Michael
But
Singer.
I also just really want to emphasize that, like even just the title of this episode, Beyond Recovery, I feel like I'm still in the long tail of recovery.
Mhm.
It's like when I finished the program back early this year, um, with the exception of, a night here or there where I had some trouble sleeping, I slept pretty much fine. And it's really only been, even on the boat, as you mentioned, a lot of things went wrong, things broke. At the end, my husband injured himself and we had to cut our trip short. Things were stressful. My sleep continued to go okay. It's really only been recently that I've had my first, what I would call kind of a speed bump since I got out of the program. And as soon as I started, I had a few nights in a row where I felt like I just slept a little less than I had wanted to, and I woke up a little early, and um, thought, oh my gosh, like what if I've forgotten everything about how to deal with this now? I haven't been practicing it the way I was so intensely
Mhm.
when I
Mhm.
couldn't sleep ever. And I had to recall, come back to those core things, but they're still there,
Yeah.
back to that witness consciousness when I'm awake at night, to that reminding myself everything's going to be okay. I started using, I had really, mantras had really helped me while I was in recovery, like just using the mantra, I am safe in the present moment.
Mhm.
And then I can handle this.
Yeah.
Those two mantras really spoke to me, and I had stopped needing to ever use them. Now, when I wake up early in the morning and I'm like, oh, it's not light out, but I'm awake. I can come back to those mantras, and just the fear doesn't spin up. It's still there a little, but I'm able to, just sort of allow it and
Yeah.
not freak out. And it
Yeah.
just changes everything. And
It
so I lose
does.
an hour of sleep rather than the whole night now. And I
It
just
does.
accept that, I'll go through periods like this.
Yeah.
But
No, and that is recovery. Like, I think the definition of recovery maybe needs some expansion, because you are recovered, Kristin. Like, this is recovery. What you're explaining to me is recovery. This is kind of where, yeah, we're still going to have moments, because we're human, right? And our brain, it also does not forget. We talked about this before, when you were in the program and whatnot, but these neural pathways that were originally created when we developed insomnia, it's not like they get deleted or obliterated. That's not how the brain works. They will always remain, but new neural pathways have sprung up, have developed. And these are the ones that the brain is now habituated to take. And these are about safety, and I can handle this, and I'm okay. And that's recovery. And that doesn't mean that every once in a while, these other neural pathways are kind of like scar tissue, and every once in a while we bump up against them. And that's okay. That's normal. That's just how the brain works, but that it doesn't stop us, and we don't get into a spiral for days and days, because we've learned so much. We've grown so much. We have the capacity now in a different way. And like you said, we do remember, like, all that stuff is still there. All that new growth is still there. And so I think if we just can understand it in a little bit more of an expansive way, you are there. This is recovery. What you're experiencing now is recovery. It's just not black and white. There's still waves, because life is always going to have waves, right?
yeah, I think the difference is, the fear can crop up sometimes,
yeah,
but the fear of fear is gone. So
that's exactly right.
I can allow it to just be there and accept that it's okay.
I think that's a perfect place to conclude our conversation, and a perfect point to make right here, because that I couldn't have said it better myself. It's that fear of fear that is no longer there. It's just sometimes fear pops up and then it leaves, but it's not looping. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Wow. Well, that was so cool, just talking to you about all this. Do you have anything else you want to share with the community before we finish up our conversation today?
Well, I'll just tell you that my Substack, if you want to read about my sailing journey and my most recent episode, my most recent essay was about insomnia, and
it was so good. I loved it so much. I'll figure it out. Well, I'll link it in the notes of this show. I know that there's a way to do that, because I hear people say it. So I'll figure that out. And I'll link Kristin's Substack in the notes of this episode, so that you guys can go check it out, because that essay, article, whatever you call those, because they're posts, blogs, what do you call them?
I usually call it an essay.
Okay, essay. I want to make sure I'm using the right word. But it was so good. It was really just such a beautiful essay on insomnia and your journey. And so I do encourage everybody to follow along and read about the sailing journey that you had, because I thought that was really so inspiring too.
When I think about it, the sailing journey was really about all the same things as insomnia recovery. It was about sort of letting go of, all my fears of discomfort and my need to control, and just letting myself sort of go with the flow of where things were taking us, because I could not be in control of that journey. And I also cannot be in control of my sleep, which is what I was trying to do for so many years.
What a metaphor. What it really was. When I was reading that, going along with that, I was like, this is such a metaphor for the whole insomnia recovery journey. Yeah. So I couldn't agree more. All right, Kristin, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today, and for sharing more of your recovery story and everything that's been going on with you since you left the immunity program. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you.